Okay, ready? Well, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so now I think the last time we saw each other was at the Socialist Alternative NC in Minneapolis. What was that, 2017 or 18? I kind of forget.
Yeah, that was the summer. That must have been 2017.
Yeah, I think it was 2017. Yeah, that was a fun trip. I mean, I enjoyed being there. There's some things I think both of us would disagree with that went on with what they talked about there, but we can get to that. First, maybe when you say what is you with the International Socialist Group, and
Yeah, I'm with Independent Socialist Group.
sorry, independent. I'm sorry, I was thinking of the ISL. I'm sorry, independent. I knew that Independent Socialist Group, and you're in Worcester, Massachusetts. When you tell a little bit about what your organization is and what you do, and Trotskyist Group, we just tell basically what it is, and then we can get into other stuff. What are you doing?
Sure. So, Independent Socialist Group, we started late in 2019 now. So we're just over a year old now at this point. And we're an organization of revolutionary socialists, Trotskyists, Marxists, trying to build a national organization, working towards a national organization that for our goal is to grow working class forces, revolutionary socialist forces, and organize, play our part in helping to organize the working class, not only into a revolutionary organization like ours, but also into broader, working class politics, unions, a labor party, et cetera, for the purposes of challenging and overthrowing capitalism.
Okay, so do you see the ISG, Independent Socialist Group, is like building up into a vanguard party, or do you see it uniting with other groups, or like having a presence in working class movements? How do you see that?
Well, I don't know that we'd necessarily say vanguard party, but I think in terms of the conception of a revolutionary party like Lenin and James Cannon and others talked about. I think we see ourselves as not being there yet, but aiming to build sort of a disciplined organization of committed revolutionaries, and whether we unite with other groups, other forces down the road is events will tell. But I think for ourselves we see our organization as having and really the broader left as having sort of the dual task, right? The task of building up revolutionary organizations like our own, but also the task of building a broader, working class party that, would represent lots of different tendencies, politics, and there would be room and space within that for debate, discussion, and reaching unity. But I think that for the purposes of building ISG, yeah, we aim to build ourselves as a disciplined, cadre-based organization.
Okay, how would you view a group like the Movement for a People's Party, like Nick Brana, that project? Do you think they're like liberal reformist, or they're not going to go anywhere, or do you think they have potential, or what would be your take on that?
Well, I guess the potential question is an interesting one, right? Everything has potential, but potential to go where is the real question, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was the development of the Movement for a People's Party initiative and Nick Brana, breaking from the Democratic Party and really from Sanders way back, years ago. That was an interesting and I would say positive development. But I think in terms of the politics of the organization, it's very much a mixed bag. So in Worcester, we've actually had some cooperation with Worcester for People's Party, which is sort of the local group for Movement for People's Party. And, there are various figures within, some of which have healthier politics, some of which do not, right? So I think Movement for a People's Party could very well develop into something, into a registered political party that's able to contest elections in various places. But I think right now, at the very least, its national leadership is dominated by, by liberals, reformists, people who, probably have a little too much faith in a system, in electoralism. They don't have necessarily a working class approach. They don't approach things from, certainly not a Marxist point of view, but a lot of them not a socialist point of view. So I think Movement for a People's Party has the potential to turn into a party, but whether it's the party that the working class needs is a very different question, I think.
Yeah. I think for one part of that, I think they're really naive about electoralism. I don't know, they have overwhelming emphasis on that, and I think it's mostly a dead end at this point. And even if some extremely small chance of actually coming to power, they'll rapidly be overthrown. But so I think they're really naive in that. Okay, I meant to ask, you're in Worcester. Where else is your organization? Worcester, Massachusetts? Are you throughout New England now, or?
So we have a pretty healthy organization in Worcester, which is where most of our members are when we started back towards the end of 2019. But we have members we have more members in New England, Boston, Western Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. But we also have, not huge forces or anything like that, but we have members, scattered around the U.S., New York, Georgia, Florida, California, Ohio. So we don't have a national organization yet, but we do have people outside of the New England area. And obviously we aim to get more.
Right. Now, many of these people came to the organization after you split from Socialist Alternative?
Yeah, I'd say I'd have to look at the numbers, but we had the biggest part of our growth started in this summer, really. This past summer with the explosion around George Floyd and this resurgence in the Black Lives Matter movement, and that was of course after the original members of ISG left Socialist Alternative. So yeah, we've had pretty healthy recruitment. We've doubled our numbers since we left Socialist Alternative.
Okay. That's good. Okay, that's good. Now, if I can ask, what was behind we were in Socialist Alternative together.
Yeah.
What was behind why did you split from Socialist Alternative? And whatever you feel comfortable talking about, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you feel comfortable talking about whatever processes led you to split from Socialist Alternative.
Sure. Well, so to a certain extent, part of this, there's organizational elements and there's for the whole of ISG, and then there's myself, right, as well. So yeah, you and I were both members. I joined Socialist Alternative in May of 2014. And that was shortly before, Bernie Sanders was growing in terms of popularity, presence on the national scene, et cetera. And there was, lots of indications that he was going to run for president. And in 2015, Socialist Alternative adopted a strategy towards Sanders' campaign called Movement for Bernie, which, for myself and other some other members within Socialist Alternative at the time, we felt that went too far. Friendly engagement with Sanders supporters, sympathy, of course, and discussion of the issues and common agreement and the way forward. But there shouldn't be support for, one of the, for us, for ISG now, the independent part of Independent Socialist Group refers to the political independence of the working class, the idea that the working class cannot rely on organizations of the ruling class, no matter Democrat or Republican, to advance their interests, right? And we have to build our own party, our own forces. And so the Movement for Bernie strategy crossed the line for myself and other comrades. And so that kicked off debates within Socialist Alternative, debates at the 2016 National Convention. They continued, obviously, in the years past, because after Sanders, there was AOC and other sort of reformist figures coming out of DSA, et cetera, that were identified as left Democrats, socialists within the Democratic Party, some would call them.
Yeah.
Right. So those debates continued, obviously, because it wasn't about Bernie. It was about the breaking with the Democratic Party, putting our money where our mouth is in terms of what's the way forward. If we think it's independent politics, for the working class, not just independent politics per se, right? Because then we'd obviously be supporting every libertarian or green that comes along, right? But working class independent politics, then we need to support independent working class politics, and that means no support for Democrats or people who say that the way forward is in the Democratic Party. And so those debates continued. We participated in the 2018 convention. The debates continued then as well. And really 2019, we formed, a lot of the comrades that went on to form ISG formed a faction within Socialist Alternative, and later left the organization. So it was primarily around the issues of the Socialist Alternative's orientation towards Sanders, AOC, and other Democrats, and sort of this question of working class independent politics and class independence, really.
Right. There's stories in Seattle. Shama Sawant was not so tacitly supporting local Dem politicians, stuff like that. And I remember when I was in Minneapolis that time, I was an at-large member at the time. They had the slogan, big slogan, said, build a party of the 99% for a political revolution against the billionaire class, like from the Sanders campaign slogans, but that's completely un-Marxist. I mean, no, we want to build a party of the working class for a social revolution against the ruling class. So this is the way they phrased that was
right.
Really bad. And I remember they were kind of pushing DSA on people a lot. We got to work in the DSA. We got to work. They were really pushing that on people, and That was a bit of a turn off. But yeah, so okay, now yeah, I meant to ask this in the beginning. How do you explain socialism to people? Like,
Well, there's yeah,
no, go ahead.
there's obviously, I mean, there's always a lot of ways to approach the question of socialism. I find that, you know, in talking with people, you know, whether it's in my workplace or you know, out in sort of you know, at activity and things like that. It can really depend on where someone's coming from, you know, what sort of issues matter to them, what brought them out. But I think almost in some ways the question of explaining socialism has gotten a little bit, in some ways it's gotten easier, some ways it's gotten harder. Easier because a lot of the, or parts of the old Red Scare rhetoric are gone. You know, people my age didn't grow up with the threat of the Soviet Union and everything else, and the you know, the sort of the bludgeon of you know, oh, you like Stalin, you know, you wanna turn the United States into the Soviet Union, et cetera. But at the same time, there's new problems, right? So if I go out on the street and I say I'm a socialist, there's a lot of people out there now saying they're socialists, right? And so it's kind of necessary to distinguish what kind of socialism you're talking about. And so, you know, you can always use things like, you know, the old phrases, bring democracy into the economy, et cetera, all this other stuff. But I think, you know, for myself, socialism starts from the point of working class power, and the idea that firstly, the working class is, you know, one, much bigger than people think it is. And it looks a lot different than how a lot of people think it does. But the idea of, you know, the climate is dying, massive exploitation of wealth and funneling of, you know, profits, obviously, to the pockets of the ruling class and the capitalist class. And all of these problems that we see in society, that we experience on a daily basis, and these issues, they can't be fought through the Democratic Party, just through elections, just, you know, through protests in the street. The only way we can end any of these problems, the only way we can make any progress towards fixing any of these problems is if we have the power. We being the working class. We never have in the United States. We've never had sort of the control station. You know, we've never had the wheel when it comes to the economy, when it comes to politics, anything like that. And so socialism is the idea of the working class democratically owning and controlling society, and that includes the economy, but also it includes parts, things that aren't necessarily thought of as sometimes as being part of the economy, things like housing, schools, you know, all public services, et cetera. And so that's, I think, that's where we start. And the question of how we get to socialism is, I think, the thing that distinguishes the different socialist organizations, or at least the reformists from the revolutionaries. Because, like you said, I think it's being demonstrated that electoralism, just the strategy of running for office or voting for people or trying to get legal reform on its own, is a dead end. You know, obviously there can be gains made from it, but the ones that are made are, you know, constantly under threat. They can be rolled back. We see that in In the U.S., we see that in lots of other countries. And so the question is, what do you do aside from voting, elections, to try to build for socialism, to try to get to that point where the working class has political control? And so for us, it does come down to a question of revolution, but in the immediate term, there's working class action that can be taken outside of the elections, ideally attached to elections, right? Attached to electoral efforts or legal efforts, but, strikes, occupations, sit-ins, even just demonstrations, marches, things like that. These are all picket lines. These are all tactics that that socialists and the left need in order to make any progress, whether it's electorally or otherwise.
Right. Interesting. Do you see the possibility of, do you see something like a general strike is possible in the near future? Or would that be don't think it would happen? Or do you think, to me, it seems like almost right now, it's the only thing that could really get us anywhere. But it would be very difficult to organize. And of course, to call one prematurely and it fails would be a disaster also. You think that might be something we could eventually build towards?
I mean, so yeah, I think it kind of, going back to the movement for a People's Party question, there's always the potential for a general strike or something like that, right? I mean, right now it doesn't seem possible, right? Because the unions are, for the most part, they're weak. They're not taking a fighting stance. They're still firmly in under the control of officials, figures who have, run them for decades, that have, turned away from organizing, obviously turned away from independent politics, and instead support, mainly lobbying and the Democratic Party, et cetera. And we can see where that's gotten unions. We can see the membership numbers, the lack of any, big national victories in terms of organizing. There are some important victories that have been won with things like, West Virginia, the teachers' strike, and other sort of labor battles in the past years, but they haven't turned into a big transformation of the labor movement's approach. So right now, it seems, a general strike seems totally off the cards, but I don't think it necessarily is, right? When the Great Depression hit, people thought it was the death of American labor, right? The American Federation of Labor was so totally out of touch. They were saying, even a couple months before the Great Depression was hit, that labor was just going to keep growing. Things had never been better. And then, of course, the Depression hit, devastated their membership. So many people lost their jobs, lost their livelihoods, and it seemed like everything was over. And of course, you have the construction of the Congress of Industrial Organizations and the biggest union movement that the United States has ever seen before. And that happened at this time when everything looked incredibly bleak. So I think a general strike, strikes and a general strike are things that socialists need to pose right now and need to put out there, even if they don't seem realistic, even if they don't seem like they're, right there ready to happen, because the underlying conditions are still there, right? The objective conditions, the devastation of the economy, the low-paying jobs, the anger that's present everywhere in U.S. society, and especially in the working class, has the potential to explode, and it has the potential to take over old organizations and build new ones, depending on events. So certainly a general strike would be a big step forward.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Another question I meant to ask us a bit earlier. Now, you're in the CWI, the Committee for Workers International. Technically, you're not a member. I know there's one of those Cold War laws that U.S. socialist groups can't be officially in an international. So you're kind of, when I was in Socialist Alternative, say we're in solidarity with the CWI. You can't really say you're a member, but legal technicality, I guess. But anyway, so there was a split a little while, I think, before you guys left Socialist Alternative. There was a split in the CWI, and the U.S. Socialist Alternative left and joined the split. I believe they call the ISA, International Socialist Alternative. They call themselves. And then you guys, or the Independent Socialist Group, reaffiliated with the CWI. I wonder if you could talk about that for a minute. What went on there, and why was your reasoning for reaffiliating?
Sure. Well, so obviously the international debate and split was you know a big thing to say the least. There were a lot of documents produced, a lot of debates were held, a lot of discussions, and there is a number of those documents have been published online. So of course, if anybody wants to really read into the depths of the debate, it's out there. But yeah, so broadly speaking, I think there were some key themes that emerged through the debate, and they were discussed. There were these specific examples that were discussed in various countries, in various sections, et cetera. But the main themes were, questions of how to avoid opportunism, how to avoid lowering the banner, right? Watering down the politics of the organization of revolutionary socialism in order to try and get mass appeal. The question of what does an orientation towards the working class look like, and what does systematic work among the working class, building forces within the working class, what does that look like? And so these are all, those are some of the main themes of the debate that led to the split. And, I think you'll agree, Kate, that for us at least, when those themes started to become apparent, because they didn't, the debate developed over several months.
Sure.
And when it started to be clear that's what the debate was about, for myself, for other comrades within what's now ISG, the big thing was for us, a lot of these are the questions that we've been debating along these lines within Socialist Alternative, right? For us, the strategy towards the quote unquote left Democrats represented a lot of these questions, right? From our perspective, opportunism, watering down the politics, lowering the banner, things like movement for Bernie, and other organizations, are other sort of banners that Socialist Alternative used. For us, felt like hiding our politics, hiding our organization, in order to bring us into contact with people, and then not necessarily be politically honest with them about who we were or what we thought. And so we thought that because the question was around whether the work of some sections had gone too far in terms of opportunism, lowering the banner, things like that, we thought the U.S. section fit into that. And so we participated in the debate to try and bring that forward. And so that led to discussions with the comrades who are now in the CWI over the course of the debate. And so during the debate, we never sort of fully, we were never 100% on either side, but it was very obvious that we leaned, towards the comments that what's now the CWI were putting forward in terms of opposition to opportunism and all that. And so those discussions continued after the split happened internationally, and the split happened internationally in a lot of sections, but it continued to play out in some other sections for a period past that. And so we continued those discussions with the CWI and after we left Socialist Alternative, and we were able to reach political agreement and reaffiliate. And so, yeah, we're now in political solidarity with the Committee for Workers International.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I had left the organization before that, before the split. I think maybe a year or so before the split. So yeah, I remember. Were you at that big debate in Boston that time? The burn turn debate. Like they had these regional debates after the organization was already committed to supporting Sanders. Then they kind of after the fact they had these debates. It got a little heated. I don't know if you were there or not. I think it was at BU or Topsy. I think it was at BU or something. But anyway, yeah. So my understanding, I met Peter Taff a few times. I met him in Seattle. I believe he has health issues right now, and I think he stepped down and retired. But did he sort of originally kind of support the orientation towards Sanders, or I think he was then willing to be a little more flexible towards it?
Yeah, so in 2016 and 2015, in the debate, when the debate around Sanders and the approach to the left Democrats, kicked off, the CWI in general supported the approach. Didn't support every element of it, but then with what happened in 2016 and in the events after that, and sort of where things developed in terms of this new wave of reformism, et cetera. So in the debate and the discussions that eventually led to the split internationally, the Sanders strategy, came into question. The strategy of this sort of critical support for Sanders and AOC and figures like that came into question. And so that was obviously a big thing for us, was the we had held what we considered to be a consistent position, since 2015 around the fact that, or the idea that this strategy was wrong, and that it did not, it however you want to phrase it, it crossed the class line, or it didn't lead towards independent working class politics. And so obviously we weren't going to affiliate with the CWI or any other organization that we felt if that there was confusion on that question, right? And so, yeah, I think it's fair to say that through discussions between ourselves, and the CWI, we reached understanding, agreement about those questions, and you can read now, the CWI's republished our material around the elections and things like that, and so I would say there's the CWI is fully behind the idea of what's necessary to build a working class political party in the U.S. And what's required to break from the Democrats and the strategy of inside outside and reform for the Democratic Party.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that with me. Changing the subject slightly towards current events. What's your take, or the take of the ISG, towards Trump, or what happened in DC a couple of weeks ago, January 6th? remember Socialist Alternative. Their take on Trump was he was a weak Bonapartist, which I think I'd largely agree with. But what's your take on the Trump phenomena, and what happened in D.C.? Was it a coup attempt, or what do you see as having happened?
Mhm. Well, so Trump, I think Bonapartism is an interesting formulation, and I think it's one that's that's possibly largely correct. But what that means, practically, is I think worth exploring, especially with broader audiences, right? People outside of the left who have maybe no idea about what Bonapartism is, right? And I think Trump is very far from a conscious Bonapartist or any sort of conscious political.
Yeah, he had a mind like Swiss cheese. I mean, he's barely capable of tying his shoes. Yeah.
Right. So obviously, I mean, Trump was I think the best way to characterize him is right wing populism. Right. Not a fascist, not in the sense that is real. Because we need to be precise. We need to be precise about the terms we use, especially when it comes to fighting the right. But he represented right wing populism. So there was this sort of blunt populist appeal to Trump, economically, politically. You can see that things that he put forward that were popular, ideas, phrases like drain the swamp, right? At its root, it's a promise to root out corruption, bureaucratism, to break up the status quo in Washington and national politics, to all of this, even around the election stuff. He was always saying the system's rigged. It's rigged against him, of course, is his claim. But when he's talking about the system's broken, the system's rigged, the political elites, it's a broken clock. It's right twice a day, and you combine that with sort of like the surface level economic populism, where he talked about bringing back American manufacturing, right? Saving American jobs, all this stuff. But of course, that populism, right? That element of being appearing to be a political outsider, and appearing to really shake things up. That was all surface level. I think that's really important. That appeal was all surface level. You dip below the surface at all, and the political outsider thing comes into question, right? He had plenty of connections with politicians beforehand. He had explored politics before. He was famous.
Yeah, he was a fraud. Yeah,
buddy with the Clintons, etc. And then, you go just below the surface on the economic populism, and obviously there was nothing there as well, right? All the promises were empty, and we saw that with the rejection of some of the people who had supported Trump, possibly for economic reasons, around coal and around the Rust Belt and things like that. He promised, he was at some manufacturing plant promising to save their jobs, and then it shut down during his presidency, right? So you combine that economic, that sort of surface level populism on the economic front, the political front, and you can't separate that from the right wing elements, right? You can't separate the fact that that from the fact that he was overtly, racist, sexist, queerphobic, and the fact that all of his economic populism, all of his sort of political populism was couched in nationalism, in white supremacy, etc. And so you have this this figure who really what it boils down to is taking advantage of the deep, deep political and economic crisis of U.S. capitalism that's developed over the past, 20 years, and is taking advantage, took advantage of the opening, the political vacuum that existed, where when you have the establishment and you have no viable left alternative, and Trump's out there, he's perfectly positioned to take advantage of parts of that anger, the disappointment, the frustration, and channel that into support for him. So, but I think it's also important to mention that with Trump, he never had support significantly beyond what any president has had. It remains true that the majority of American workers don't vote and don't see themselves as supporters of either of the main capitalist parties, and so that narrative of the American working class supporting Trump, I think, doesn't last beyond even the first bit of scrutiny. Sure, elements of it, you can pick, you can cherry pick, and you can find a Trump supporting worker, but you can do the same for the Democrats. That doesn't change the fact that the majority of American workers didn't support either, right? So I think Trump wasn't a fascist in the sense of having an organized fascist movement behind him, ever really seriously threatening to break the back of the working class, to liquidate, and completely smash the working class's organizations. But I think part of that is because capitalism at this point doesn't necessarily feel like it needs to. And so he had a lot more in common with Reagan and with other sort of traditional Republican figures than people would like to talk about. People talk about him as being some big departure from the Republicans.
Yeah. That's what I see as well. He wasn't, despite his rhetoric, horrible rhetoric, he wasn't that far outside of the norm of U.S. presidents. Bush was worse in some ways, the Iraq War. But I think maybe people say that Trump actually has probably more in common with Italian politicians, Berlusconi, rather than Mussolini figure. But I think the threat of fascism, it exists, but it's been massively exaggerated. And if we get fascism, it would come from unexpected directions, not from.
There's always been American fascist organizations. The KKK, the American Nazi Party, the right wing of the 80s and 90s, and if those organizations still continue to exist today. There are fascist organizations in the United States. I don't think they're at a point where they threaten to seize power. And I think really the balance of power is not in their favor. And that was demonstrated, I think, most concretely in the aftermath of the Charlottesville attacks. Things like the anti-fascist protest in Boston that I participated in.
We were there, yeah. I saw you there, yeah.
40,000.
One of those. There was 100,000. There were 4 people from Resist Marxism group, and there were 100,000 people protesting them. Yeah, I remember.
So, and I think your comment about Berlusconi, Trump having more in common with Berlusconi, I think that's absolutely right, and I think Trump has to be viewed. There's a problem within American liberalism, progressivism, of viewing American politics as being kind of an island. American exceptionalism, permeates there. You can't look at Trump without looking at Berlusconi, without looking at Boris Johnson, without looking at other right-wing populist figures like. Orban is a more serious right-winger than Trump is. Certainly not as outlandish and very much more more of a serious threat in Hungary. But there's been Trump is a symptom not only of U.S. capitalism being in decline and the deep political crisis of the U.S. political system, right? The lack of confidence in the traditional ruling class parties, but also internationally that is playing out as well in so many other countries around the world, because we have globally a deep, deep crisis of capitalism, and that is translating into a political crisis of capitalism and the capitalist parties around the world, and it's giving rise to figures both on the right and on the left. The right and the left as being sort of like big, groups, not like, the Marxist left necessarily. But I think you can't, it's too tempting to just look at Trump as being a product of U.S. capitalism and the U.S. right wing. But internationally, this is a process that's playing out in other countries with similar figures as well.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, especially American liberals, are so myopic, like one-dimensional, one-directional. What's your take on internet censorship? Like Trump was famously deplatformed from Twitter, and nobody wants to defend Trump, but there does seem to be a crackdown on the left. Recently, the UK SWP apparently was kicked off Facebook. Apparently, they're back on now, but their branches are still off Facebook. And apparently an Antifa group, according to the New York Post, for whatever that's worth, was kicked off Twitter. What's your take on this?
Well, so our comrades in the Committee for Workers International, the CWI, had their Twitter suspended as well shortly after the January 6th events. Yeah, so I think we have to be in a position, or on the left, I don't think we need to fall into this trap that liberals fall into of sort of free speech absolutism, in the sense of defending free speech as this almost like a panacea, like it's a problem. It solves all the problems if everybody just has free speech. So, like you said, we never want to be in a position where we're defending Trump or any other right wingers. But I think it's fair to say we shouldn't advocate for and we shouldn't support any kind of, repressive legislation or efforts or anything like that from the federal government. Because I think, the social media question, is secondary to the bigger question that we're seeing play out, which is around state power. And the question of social media censorship is attached to the idea of governmental, censorship, suppression. And so, I think we have to start our analysis from, who would be the people that the federal government or the state governments or anything like that would be using to quote unquote suppress the right? It would be the FBI, it would be the NSA, right? These are not progressive organizations. Right. These are not organizations that can be used effectively against the right. They can do some surface level stuff to the right, fine. They can lock up some individual figures. They'll never root out the right wing because fundamentally the right wing is not opposed to capitalism. Right. Now, you go into the history of the FBI, NSA, it emerged out of the Cold War, out of the Red Scare, out of the need to fight of the ruling class to have new tools to fight against the growing, socialist movement in the U.S. So any more power to the FBI, to the NSA, anything like that, no matter who you're trying to target, will inevitably be used against the left. against anti-racist activists, against anybody who's challenging capitalism or symptoms of capitalism, whether they realize they're whether or not they're explicitly anti-capitalist. And so, obviously we have to oppose that. And so when it comes to social media censorship, I think that's an extension of the same question. If you're asking Twitter, Facebook, whoever to I guess this is the hip word, right? Deplatform Trump or whatever right-wing figures you want, whatever right-wing organizations. So firstly, social media has always been deplatforming people on the left. That's been in existence already.
Can you excuse me 1 second?
Sure.
1 second. Be right back. My dog was growling, so he's sitting on a couch and he's not able to jump off by himself, so I had to pick him up. Okay. Continue. Go on.
No, that's totally okay. I'm kind of surprised my cat hasn't interrupted yet. She's been yowling all morning.
Right. Right. They do that.
So, yeah. So on the social media question, I think is an extension of this question of if you want to fight the right, how do you do it, and what forces do you look to? The same way that you can't look to the FBI to fight the right, you can't look to Facebook or Twitter to fight the right either. You can't look to Democrats, the state, legislation to accomplish this. It's been so long since the workers' movement, firstly, has been seen as like an actual movement, but secondly, it's been so long since the workers' movement has had to like openly confront the right-wing fascism, et cetera. So it like with the general strike, sort of to talk about it seems like fantasy at this point. But I think it's important to remind people that the same way we've carried out general strikes in the past, the workers' movement has fought the right in the past. It has successfully confronted the right wing, fascists included, and beat them back, not just in the US, but in lots of other countries as well. And so if we want to fight the right, if we want to fight fascism, fascist forces, anything like that, it has to be done through the workers' movement and the workers' organizations. It can't be done through, the Silicon Valley capitalists. It can't be done through the FBI, through the capitalist state, anything like that. We've seen Biden talking about, sort of a domestic terrorism law. We've seen lots of the language around what happened. There she is now. What happened on February 6th, sort of terrorism, treason, sedition. These are words that are traditionally used to attack the left, right? The sedition acts were used brutally against the anti-war left around World War I and weaponized against the left in the lead up to World War II as well.
Right. Okay, just in finishing, is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything else you'd like to say?
Well, so of course, I think most of your audience is already on the left and already organized, already part of an organization. So I would say that, for anybody who's not, who considers themselves a socialist, who's not in an organization already, check out Independent Socialist Group. We have a website, independentsocialistgroup.org. You can find me on Facebook, I'm sure, and talk to me on there as well. For people for other left groups, other organizations out there, I think if you're committed to independent working class politics towards building a labor party, a workers' party, however you phrase it, a party of the working class, without any influence of the capitalists or the ruling class, then I think it's crucial that there be some sort of conference, some sort of discussion, lines of communications opened up to talk about how the revolutionary left, the independent left, can move forward in terms of laying the foundations for building a working class party. I think a key part of that is a strategy for the unions that we're already in, but also a strategy to recruit more union members, more working class people in general, but also to get our own members into the workforces, the unions, and to start building. Because for us, at least, the working class is the agent of change. It's the only class that has the political power to make change under capitalism, whether that's revolutionary change or if it's just, you know, temporary reforms. The working class is the only class that has that power. So there's no shortcut but to build within the working class and organize among the working class. So yeah, I guess that's sort of my final message. If you're not already in a socialist organization, consider joining Independent Socialist Group. If you are already in a socialist organization, let's have a discussion about independent politics, about what it's going to take to build a working class party and figure out how we can move forward to that goal. So I guess that's my final takeaway.
Okay, thanks. I'll provide a link to your organization in my video. Also, Jeff told me, said you guys make YouTube videos, and I saw the one with Everett, and that was really interesting. Do you guys have a YouTube channel or a collection?
Yeah, we do have a YouTube channel. It's very small, but we've started. You know, we have a number of talented comrades. They know who they are, who are, you know, filming and editing videos of our interventions, you know, our activity, but also I think one of the most important videos we've produced so far is actually, you know, from where I'm from Worcester. There's nurses at the St. Vincent's Hospital here who are out picketing the massive understaffing, you know, to raise attention to the massive understaffing in their workplace. And we interviewed a number of the picketers and produced a very good video for that. So yeah, there is also a YouTube channel, Independent Socialist Group, and of course there's the CWI YouTube channel is CWI Media, and there's some interviews there with some of our comrades here in the U.S. If people want. I guess more ISG in video content form.
Sure. Okay, well, great. Thank you very much for your time. My dog is losing it here. I have to let him out. He's growling and barking at me, so I got to go. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Stay safe.
Okay, you too, Nick.
Bye.